Hey guys, it's Mrs. Johnson. Today you are going to write down your objective and essential question for your Ed Puzzle video. Your objective for today is add and subtract integers fluently, which is TEK 6.3D. Your essential question is how do I add and subtract positive and negative integers. So make sure you push pause, include the word objective and the word essential question before you actually write them down.
So in the objective, we said we're going to add and subtract integers fluently. First of all, I want to make sure you understand what that means. The word fluently means that you can do something without thinking about it. So if you're fluent in Spanish, you can just speak Spanish, write Spanish, read Spanish without thinking. We're trying to get you to the point where you add and subtract integers fluently without thinking. So we're going to leave this space blank for now. You're going to fill that in during your warm-up. That's going to be where we write questions about our notes. So we're just going to focus on this first question together right now. An architectural drawing of the building shows that the elevation of the basement floor to be negative 12 feet. First of all, I want to make sure I understand what that word basement means because we don't have a lot of those in Texas. So a basement is like part of a house, but it's underneath the house for storage, and it's also for shelter from things like tornadoes and stuff like that. So if this is the ground level where you walk around in the house, the basement is what is occurring underneath. So a basement floor is 12 feet underground or negative 12 feet. The elevation of the roof, which I hope you know, is all the way up here, and that's going to be at positive 32 feet. So I'm going to go ahead and mark those numbers to help me understand what's going on in the drawing. And the question says, what is the total distance from the roof to the basement floor? So I'm going all the way from the tip of the roof to the bottom of the basement. So if I'm looking at that distance and it said something about total, generally, I know that total means that I'm going to combine two numbers. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just break down the problem to make sure I really truly understand what's happening. So if I'm understanding with the keyword total, then that usually tells me that I'm going to be adding the numbers in the problem. I also have my keywords, like I said earlier, that basement means below the house. Another way to think about that is negative. Basement, there's an N there, beautiful. So basement is below or negative, and I know that a roof is above or positive. Another thing to think about is during my plan, I know for my plan I'm just going to add my two numbers because there are only two numbers in this problem. For my estimation, if I'm seeing this is a little bit more than 30 feet and this is a little bit more than 12 or than 10, then I know 30 plus 10 is about 40, so I know my answer will be a little bit more than 40. And then after I do my plan, I'm going to go ahead and solve it. So I'm going to just do the math over here on the corner. This should be pretty easy for you at this point. 32 plus 12, 2 plus 2 is 4, 3 plus 1 is also 4. So for my solve, I'm going to go ahead and put 44 feet as my answer. Now the check, I know a lot of you guys struggle with. Earlier I estimated that it was going to be a little more than 40, and I see my answer is, so it matches my estimation. I also reviewed what the word basement and roof meant, and I knew that basement was below and roof was above, so that's a good way for me to kind of qualify that I did well there. And I also know that my units are reasonable because feet tall makes sense for a house. It's not anything like inches or anything along those lines. The last thing I know for my check is that if my house was already 32 feet and I'm including a basement, then I know that that's going to be larger.
All right, guys, it's Coach Demas here. I'm going to go ahead and go through the second question. And it says the highest elevation in North America is Mount McKinley. So first thing I'm going to do is start underlining these keywords. So the highest elevation, that word elevation is pretty much elevated, so it's higher. So it's going to be 20,320 feet above sea level. So when I'm looking at above sea level, thinking about the word above, I know that means that it's going to be higher than something. So if sea level is what we're going to call 0, so anytime you see that, sea level is 0. And I know that Mount McKinley is way higher than that, and it's going to be 20,320 feet. Okay, and then the lowest elevation is Death Valley. So if I'm talking about lower elevation and it is 282 feet below sea level, it's going to be underneath this 0, and it's going to be about 282. It would technically be a negative. However, we're looking for the absolute value here, and here is why. In the question, it actually asks, what is the distance from the top of Mount McKinley to the bottom of Death Valley? So again, it's asking for the absolute value here. So we're looking for the total distance from down to the bottom all the way up to the top. Okay, so it's looking for an absolute value. Just keep that in mind. So if I was going to actually UPS check this question, first of all, I'm going to understand that it's asking me for the total distance. Therefore, I'm going to be adding. Okay, so if it's total distance, I will add my numbers together. All right, and I guess for the plan, that's what I'm also actually going to put there is add. Okay, I'm adding my two numbers. Now for the solve part, I'm going to take my two numbers and I'm going to actually add. So I would do 20,320 feet plus 282, because remember it's an absolute value, the distance from 0, and that's 282 spaces. Therefore, I'd add those two together. I'm not going to do all that computation here, but if you added them, you would end up getting 20,602 feet. So the total distance would be that. And then if I'm going to go back and check, I should have estimated, and if I had estimated properly, I would have figured out that this was about 20,300, and then this would end up, I would probably round to about 300, and it's going to end up falling about the same as the 20,602 feet. So I've checked and made sure that my estimation matches, and that's how I would go about solving this problem. Now, looking back at some of the things that Ms. Carpenter and I have both talked about, here are some questions to think about. Okay, so make sure that you write these down in your journal at, off to the side. It says, what do above sea level and below sea level mean in terms of integers? Anything that you have, anytime you have a question that's off to the side, you should be able to find the answer to that question in your notes. Okay, so when I ask what does above sea level or below sea level mean, you should be able to look over into the notes and figure out what those mean. Okay, and then when it says when you see the word basement, would you consider it a positive or a negative integer? Again, you should be able to find the answer to these questions in your notes.